Good morning. Today is the 8th of Tammuz, June 18th. It's a Friday. We're once again studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently studying Maseches Shabbos, no longer chapter 5. Today we begin a new chapter, chapter 6, Perek Bameh Isha. Primarily, the discussions will be around the topic of what humans are allowed to wear out in the public domain on Shabbos. Starting off, of course, with the adornments that women may and may not wear into the public domain. And I mentioned yesterday, but I just want to recap or add a few other ideas. We asked, why would we first talk about animals and then humans? Surely it's more important to us the way humans behave. Surely the direct actions of an individual is more significant than that of their livestock. And so we presented a few answers yesterday, and I just wanted to touch upon a few other ones before we jump into our new chapter. Number one, we mentioned at the beginning of the Masechta, and now I'm drawing a blank who mentioned it. Maybe it was the Pnei Yeshua, but I may be off on that. That the Masechet Shabbos thus far works on the chronology of how one's Erev Shabbos unfolds. So we started off describing the general domains for a variety of reasons, perhaps because we're talking about getting home and getting ready. But from then on, we're talking about the things we spoke of, the items that have to happen on Erev Shabbos, right? All the different jobs and coming home and the like. And then we spoke about Bameh Madlikin, candlelighting. We then spoke about Bameh Behema. Why? Because if your animal is restricted with what it's allowed to wear on Shabbos, when does that become an issue? On Erev Shabbos. Before Shabbos starts, you want to make sure all your animals are appropriately prepared and ready for Shabbos. Now that Shabbos has started, human beings too need to be aware. This is one explanation. Need to be aware of how they are dressed when they're going to leave the home. Being that human beings are allowed to get dressed and undressed, put on adornments and take them off as long as they're within the comfort of their home, and they are not desecrating any other Shabbos restrictions. Chronologically, the way that human beings are dressed up on Shabbos would come after the discussion of animals. That was one explanation we brought in the beginning of the Masech, or maybe it was Bameh Madlik. I don't remember when we mentioned that. Another explanation that I mentioned yesterday is that the Torah itself and the Ten Commandments talks about an obligation to be mindful of our animals. And one of the main things that animals do is carry burdens, masoi, and therefore, if what the animal is wearing is not a garment and is not permitted, it's a burden, that could touch upon biblical or biblically prohibited activities. Whereas in the Torah, in the Bible, there is no prohibition for wearing adornments. There is no such restriction. There was Xer Derabanan. Under certain circumstances, certain kinds of jewelry and the like might be prone and might have a high probability of somebody taking it off for a variety of reasons that we'll see momentarily. And so therefore those items would be restricted, they'd be prohibited for that reason, but only biblically and not rabbinically. Only rabbinically, midrabanan, and not biblically. And therefore, in the chronology reflects the severity, at least between the chapter of Bameh Behema and Bameh Isha. Others bring. Hold on, one more.
Another reason.
Give me 1 second if you don't mind, please. One other explanation that is brought, and maybe this is the same answer you're going to give. Let's see. Another explanation that is brought is that in the chronology of the creation, when Hashem created the world, the universe, first Hashem created animals, and human beings, of course, were created later in the order. So we want to reflect the divine style. We want to reflect the order of the Torah. So that's one other interesting explanation. So far we've given three, and Be'ezer Hashem, Reb Beryl is going to give us a fourth explanation. Bevakasha. Go ahead, Reb Beryl.
No, I would just think that being human beings, being what we are, we would be concerned about what we may or may not do on Shabbos, and we might forget about things like what are animals. So therefore, they start with that.
Oh, so Reb Beryl's saying a very good point. We are more acutely aware of our personal circumstances and that of our household. We see them, we're with ourselves. Whereas the animal, out of sight, out of mind, and therefore it's there's more likelihood of trouble if we don't underscore its importance. Rabbi Errol, I like it. We're going to add it to, when we print Be'ezer Hashem one day, all of our chidushim from this year, we'll add that in absolutely. Yashikach, Dr. Hammer.
There's another takeaway that I get from this discussion about Erev Shabbos and Shabbos. Okay, Zachar, Shamar, it's very important, Shabbos. But it's also very important to consider hachana for any mitzvah. And when you think about it, when I reflect on certain things and how people do it, Pesach is very important to a lot of people. There's a lot of hachana before for a time. Going before Sukkot to pick a lulav esrog to build a sukkah, a lot of hachana. Hanukkah, kids early on, So, but on the more daily, mundane kind of stuff, when I think about, actually, I have yurtzeit coming up for my mother, and I was just thinking about candle lighting, and or other things that I do and other people do, not necessarily the proper way. They quickly go to daven, put on film, blah 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 blah, and you see certain people who take more time, give more time to hachana. Okay, not just make a bracha, let's say on the candles, but take 5 minutes to do their own personal davening, or especially in shul. You look at, and I'm not one of the good guys from that point of view. There's certain very good role models. I don't want to mention names who, even whenever they come, they're not right into saying the brachas. They take their time putting on their talis. They take their time putting on the tefillin, and not that they don't know how many times they wrapped it, but they reinforce the importance of it by counting it again and stuff like that. So maybe one of the takeaways that I got from your introduction, really, from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos, is that we have a lot to gain if we could put aside enough energy and time to have hachana for any mitzvah that we do. That's it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the hachana is important, and the hachana underscores the importance of that which we are preparing for. So, for example, the doctor is saying davening, a person prepares himself, whether tefillah is going to be more meaningful, well, then it's certainly significant that Shabbos necessarily has certain hachanas that one must do. And the more we are focused and mindful, even before Shabbos, that Shabbos is coming, there are hachanas, it not only is the right way to do Shabbos, but it makes Shabbos more meaningful. Yashikayach Doctor will add that as well to our to our work, the Ezer Hashem. All right, let's share the screen. Well, just to recap, we're going to talk now about the items that a human being, we're going to start off talking about women may wear going out on Shabbos. And of course, we're not allowed to carry stuff that's just a burden, that's obvious. We are allowed to wear clothing that also is pretty obvious, or should be obvious. We're not mandated to walk around in states of unclothedness. However, there is middle ground, which is tachshitim, jewelry, which is not essential for one's modesty, if you will, or for protection from the elements. But how, on the other hand, it's not a burden. It's to dress you up. It's to take things up a notch, and there's jewelry has many significant purposes. If it's to status or to respect a certain moment, right? So, for example, you think that wearing jewelry on Shabbos is a way to enhance and to show honor for Shabbos, and yet the Gemara, or the Mishnah rather, and Chazal create some restrictions, and that's what we're going to read about first. And don't jump on me right away, but the Ezer Hashem will discuss, hopefully by the end of today or maybe Sunday, why we start off talking about women, and is there a distinction between the restrictions placed on men and women, and why? And there's a certain default that in American society today we would be inclined to go to, but let's consider perhaps there are other reasons why the Chazal might be either starting with women or providing additional restrictions. But why don't we hold off on that discussion until we see some of the Gemara. Barrel?
The Havdil the Behema. Are we going to worry about the thing dropping and you picking it up?
Let's see. Let us see. And then there's another question which we'll discuss either today or Sunday, which is going to certainly get everyone's attention, which is Is it possible that in 2021, our observance of Shabbos doesn't seem to immediately reflect all of the restrictions presented in the Mishnah? How is that, and why is that, and is that correct? So again, I'm just teasing out two important issues that I know is going to come to mind, and so I just want to preempt it and say that we'll discuss it. So let's get through some text first. Mishnah starts, Bameh isha yotza, ubameh eina yotza. What may a woman will go out? Where is yotza to where? To the public domain, or is it even to a chatzir? We'll see. But the simple reading is we're talking about going into a public domain. Ubameh eina yotza, and are there items that a woman may be restricted from wearing? And so Rashi right away makes in shorter form the introduction that I mentioned. What kind of things might you wear? To have a tachshit v'loy masa. We're talking particularly, says Rashi, about tachshitim, about adornments that are not biblically or technically a burden. V'ika to have a tachshit v'gazer be'rabanan. There are certain adornments, certain jewelry that the rabbis do make a gzeira. What's the gzeira? Dilma shalcha mechavi lechaverta. Is it a kind of jewelry that we're prone to remove to show to our friends? Why would you show it to your friends? Going to show how beautiful it is. And the kind of jewelry which is prone to being taken off can also inadvertently become jewelry worn for Amos, carried for Amos in the public domain, and that would be certainly problematic. And so that is the very first Rashi in the very first line on the Rashi on the Gemara. There's a Tosfos that's going to be on the next Gemara. Loiteitze isha. So let's talk about things women are not permitted to wear out. Anybody notice a mild but glaring distinction between the formula of Bameh Behema and the formula of Bameh Isha? So when it came to Bameh Behema, we first talked about the items that are permitted, and then we talked about the items that are prohibited. Here we talk about those items that are prohibited first, and only then which items may be permitted. Why a change in the formula of the Mishnah? Any theories? So I think the simple theory is that it's a chiddush that you can't carry something on Shabbos. You can't wear jewelry on Shabbos. That's a chiddush. So it's more important to say what you can't carry, because the default understanding, as Rashi points out, is there's nothing wrong with wearing a tachshit. There's nothing wrong with getting yourself dressed up nice and putting on jewelry or other adornments. And therefore, go ahead.
Maybe it's because women sometimes have jewelry like a necklace or a wedding ring or something that they wear all the time. So the question is, what's the chiddush for Shabbos? Are we going to ask them to take it off something that they do during the week without thinking about it?
That's very interesting. So, Doctor, you're saying that possibly, and by the way, your svara over here, your proposal to answer this question is already halfway to the answer of another question that we asked. So the doctor is suggesting, I said it's a chiddush because halachically, not halachically, biblically, you're allowed to wear jewelry. The Rabbanan are concerned about you carrying the Daled Amos. I said the chiddush is what you have to remove. Dr. Hammer said even more elementary but very interesting and important perspective. What's the chiddush for a woman? If she wears jewelry every day, it's not a chiddush to say, oh, you're allowed to continue wearing your jewelry. The action, the proactive step would be to remove the jewelry. So I like that as well, certainly. That would certainly explain why it would be a bigger chiddush to say not to go out. Doctor, hold that thought when we're going to talk about if today there's a difference today. If there's a difference between how jewelry and adornments are worn in the modern today and the time of the Mishnah, there may be a distinction, and that might have halachic implications. So just hold that thought. So what can't you wear? Lo teitze isha, lo b'chutei tzemer. We read this yesterday, but now we'll spend some more time really understanding what we're talking about. You're not allowed to go out with chutei tzemer, with strings of wool somehow in your hair. V'lo b'chutei pishtan, nor strings of flax, same thing. V'lo b'rtzuos sheberoisha nor with straps, which we must imagine is probably a headband or some other kind of hair affixing piece. Below titbal. And all of these items, one also mustn't go into the mikvah while wearing them ad shetirapeim, until they are loosened up. So we're talking about the laws of Shabbos, and all of a sudden we drop a word about mikvah. So let's see Rashi. How are these strings connected to your hair? So Rashi says shekolaat bahem sa'ara, that they are interwoven, they are braided into your hair. Shebirosha. So he says akulu kali kali. We're talking about all of these items, our head adornments. Ubi Gemara mefarish time, the Gemara is going to ask or explain what's unique about head adornments. Why can't one go to the mikveh while having their hair all made up with these straps and strings and stuff? Mishum chatzitza, because it would be a chatzitza. What is a chatzitza? So as we know, when a person goes to the mikveh, their body must be entirely exposed to the water. Anything that separates between the human flesh or hair and the mikveh can be a problem. When is it a problem? When it's so tight that water cannot get through. But if it's loose, it might not be a problem. So you'll ask me, can one go into the mikveh wearing a bathing suit or something like that? And conventionally that's not done, but there are occasions where it might be necessary. And then the question will be how loose and can the water get through it, or is it tied real tight? So for example, and this is not a psak halacha, and I also thankfully don't really have much firsthand knowledge because we live in a wonderful Jewish community and I've always lived in Jewish communities that have mikvahs, but there are people that live in places where they don't have mikvahs, and it becomes a shaila. Can and should you go into the ocean or into the bay if it's halachically an acceptable body of water? And then the question is, should they be risking incarceration by indecent exposure, or can they wear some kind of garment over? And if there is ever an actionable scenario, one should consult their competent halachic guide, but there are occasions where it certainly would be acceptable to wear some kind of clothing. And in that scenario, it would have to be such that it doesn't allow for chatzitza. Similarly, those that need to go to the mikveh for halachically mandated purposes, make sure to remove all different things before going to the mikveh. So women that go to the mikveh today, and there may be exceptions, or there may be certain, so I don't want to, but just generally they would remove nail polish, makeup, and tight rings and other things that they one might have on the body. Women who go to the mikveh for halachically mandated purposes will typically bathe to loosen even scabs or other things that might, and other kinds of dirt. They'll comb their hair so there are no knots. And all of those things are to be in the ideal state of not having any chatzitza, any interruption between themselves and the water. And so all of these items tightly affixed, says Rashi, they would be a chatzitza. Ad shetirapim, until they're loosened. Shetatirim ktsas, loosen it a bit. Sheyiyu refoyim, so they'll be loose. Yikonso amayim b'neim l'seyar, and now the water will be able to free flow and access the hair. So Rashi says all these items are braided into the hair, they're tied tightly, they prevent water from reaching the entirety of the hair, and loosening them up would allow the water to be accessible. The Gemara is going to say, what's this deal of mikveh? Why does mikveh come in over here? The Gemara says, well, that's exactly the point. Because occasionally people go to mikveh on Shabbos. And if they're going to go to mikveh on Shabbos, they're going to have to loosen these items. Well, then there's a high probability that they'll be left holding their hair pieces because they've been loosened for the purposes of mikveh. We'll discuss more at length when we get to the Gemara, but I just wanted to give you that heads up. Tosfos, let me just show you real briefly, has a different interpretation of what is wrong. So we'll look at Tosfos. I hope you don't mind, we'll take a little detour. So he says, the Gemara explains, what's the deal? Mishum dilma misrami latfila shel mitzvah. Maybe they'll have to go to the mikveh. Vishari lahu, and they'll untie their hair stuff. The asilas yisuno arba ames b'shus rabim, and they may come to be carrying it on their way to the mikveh on the way back, and that would be a problem. Amari, the Re says they cannot be braided in the tight manner that we understood previously. Why not? Why is Ri arguing with Rashi? Because if it's tied in, if it's woven into the hair and tied in, we're not afraid of it being untied. You know why? Because we say later on in the Gemara, there would be an isser, there would be a prohibition for undoing the hair in such a manner. Because you're not allowed to make this particular type of braid. So that whatever this kliya is, whatever this precise type of braiding is, if it's prohibited to do on Shabbos, it should also be not acceptable to undo it. So maybe we should say that you're never allowed to go to the mikvah on Shabbos because you might end up untying your hair. Sigmar says no. We're not afraid of that. We're not afraid of major issues. We're only afraid of small things that are easy to mix up and make a mistake. And then the Ri says further, the only issues that we have on Shabbos are things that you're going to either show your friend or will be a chatzitza, or we're afraid that if you lose it, you'll for sure want to hold it. But something that you can wear, you don't typically remove, we're not going to restrict you from going to the public domain. Anyways, long story short, we're not going to make a gzera on everything. We're primarily concerned about the mistakes that are easy to make and prone to happen, and that's what we're talking about. So we have a little machlokes here, Rashi and Tosfos, precisely the nature of how these straps are connected to the hair. Is it a tight braid or braiding, or is it just some kind of highlights that are interspersed in there? You know what? Hold on. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. I wanted to show you. Hold on, please. So this is not really for reference, but I just want to remind you that Jewish jewelry and clothing and stuff looked different times in Jewish history. And so, for example, this is not like scientific and it's not necessarily going to help us for the class, but I just wanted to show, if you look at old pictures of Jews that came from the different places, it's particularly, I think you see this when you look at the wedding dresses of people from Persia and Bukhara. There's a very different and ornate series of adornments, some of them that are going to sound somewhat familiar as we'll go through the Mishnah, although today in America you don't frequently see this unless you have the privilege of being invited to a wedding in Great Neck or something to that effect. Then you might have the privilege of seeing, or in Queens. But so again, I'm just showing you these. We'll go through them, and maybe some of the things we see in these pictures will become more relatable. But I just wanted to share that so we see that a lot of this stuff is not. If we're trying to imagine the jewelry being discussed against the paradigm and against what we would typically see in Miami or New York or Montreal 2021, it's not always so. Dr. Hammer?
But I think that the 2021 in our shul or in any modern Orthodox shul, women wear more jewelry and the explanation would be hidur mitzvah, just like we wear your Shabbos clothing, and their Shabbos clothing includes more adornment, some of which can be, if not taken off, I would say shown off by, oh, you have a nice, oh, that's a new thing that you have. They might not take it off and want to handle it, but
so you're saying if anything,
very fine line there between.
Also, I wasn't saying that today we don't wear jewelry versus once upon a time. I was just saying the style may have evolved slightly since back then. So some of the things we're reading about may be more relatable. Of course, everything that the Mishnah is going to discuss is going to is able to be translated into what we might recognize and has halachic implications. I just wanted to show you, just to broaden our imagination of what we might be describing here. But your point brings us back to the question I said we'll discuss, which is we have a lot of jewelry wearing on Shabbos today, and is it acceptable? Are those not included in the items that a woman may wear on Shabbos, or is there another reason why they're worn? So let's see.
You get into tznius also.
Tznius is of course a big issue. It's not necessarily going to be the issue of our parents.
No, I understand, but I'm saying that kavana is important even when we're talking about jewelry on Shabbos. I'm just bringing kavana back.
Yes.
We spoke about kavana. End of story. I rest my case.
Oh, Dr. Don. Yes.
Part of the difference between Rashi and Tosfos, you're talking the couple of generations, and the jewelry changes. So that might be a factor also. I noticed some of the headdress even seems to have coins in it.
Yeah. By the way, these are not pictures necessarily of Shabbos. I think those were
I'm saying
ceremonial. Correct. Beryl, it's interesting that you say that. I'm not inclined to imagine that the Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos is generational. It looks like it's more how they understand the nuance of the restriction and what we're concerned about. I'll explain to you briefly the way I see it. And again, Mir Hashem, we can dig deeper going forward. But the question is, Tosfos' proposal that it's loosely affixed or not even woven in is a problem because the odds of being a chatzitza are lower. So Tosfos has a problem, and it has to do with the fact that you shouldn't be allowed to weave your hair on Shabbos. And for that reason, Tosfos says we're obviously talking about loosely done. But Rashi, so each one has a problem that the other one kind of considers. I think the debate is, my sense, is that it's more halachic in nature, but it's certainly interesting to consider generally that, and I think you see this a lot with Tosfos, is that many times the psaka that Tosfos gives is more inclined to take into account, realities on the ground. And Tosfos and Rashi did, although they're relatives, right? Many of the Bali Tosfos were the grandchildren of Rashi, or the sons-in-law of Rashi. A lot happened in those years, and namely the Crusades, and Jews had it a lot easier in the time of Rashi, although not relative to today, than the people of the Bali Tosfos, which many of them experienced terrible tragedies, including mass murder and attack and horrific events. Some of the Bali Tosfos were killed actually during the Crusades, and others had family members. So certainly they lived in a horrific time. My instinct here is not to see it that way, but it's always interesting to consider.
But Rabbi, we have to take into account developments. Like you have a thing like Velcro today.
Yeah, but again, their discussion is
you have to adjust.
But their debate is not discussing different techniques. Their debate is what's permissible on Shabbos. So in this instance, my sense, but I'm glad you brought it to our attention, because in general, it's good to bear in mind that sometimes Tosfos will consider scenarios that maybe didn't exist in the time of the Gemara, the Mishnah. Just like Velcro, for example, today exists, and it didn't exist in the time of Rashi or Tosfos.
Is that Kriya to open a Velcro? Who knows?
Good question. Be'ezer Hashem will get there too.
We'll get to Velcro.
Be'ezer Hashem, yes, because we'll see other things that will be applicable, or at least somewhat applicable to Velcro.
Naftali Bennett got to it with his keeper. So
yes.
He uses Velcro, you think?
Keepot keeper. It's an Israeli product.
There was a headline that he was interviewed by some. You saw that? I suspect he was joking.
No.
No, he said that he uses bubble gum.
Oh no! I saw that also. That he tried it once, he couldn't get, but then they go into the actual product that he uses, and then the guy who developed it. Anyway,
the guy did some good sales after that, I'm sure. I hope.
Right.
Speaking about kippas, there's a famous picture of Ben Gurion and the Pope, and the caption was, "The one with the kippah, the Pope."
Yeah. All right, let's get back to another interesting.
Rabbi,
yes.
When were shekels brought into existence?
Good question. We might get there, but
before makeup, Alan. Before makeup.
I'll tell you this: the original.
I'm not so sure. I'm
The
not
original-
so sure, Bernie. I'm not
Yeah.
so
The
sure.
original shaitel did not have quite the same quality of hair as they have today. It was not all human, to my knowledge, or maybe some of it was. Let's continue because, well, let's see. Below bito, he says totefes. Does that sound familiar to you? That word? Does it sound like anything that you may know from the Bible? Let's say.
I'm not looking at the word. Where is it?
Here.
We don't have the screen with the wording.
Oh, you don't have the screen? Hold on. Stop share. Okay. Sorry about that. Here we go. Velo be to tefes. Does that sound familiar?
Totafos.
Oh, what's totafos? V'hayu letotafos beinenecha. So totefes sounds very, very similar to the word totafos. So first of all, what is totefes and sarbitin? So Rashi says the Gemara is going to discuss. What is totefes? So I saw, not here. Hold on, let's see something. Anyway, suffice it to say, we're describing, we'll see in the Gemara, adornments that go roughly in the same place where the tefillin go. So either you might say that it's related to the same shoresh, or the inclination, I think, of the commentaries to say that the totefes is a jewelry that we recognize because it goes on a similar place as where the tefillin go. What exactly was a totefes? So it was some kind of head plate, maybe similar to that which the Kohen, we imagine the Kohen Gadol wearing the tzitz, and so it's something to that effect. And the Gemara actually is going to mention that it's the same like the tefillin. So we'll see that in the Gemara. So anyways, lo b'totefes, lo b'sarbitin, b'zman she'ein tefurah. You cannot go with a totefes or a sarbitin, again, not yet translated, with their knot woven into the, and it says here, head covering. So basically, these could be additional accessories, and when they're loose, you can't wear them. But loy bechabul or shusarabim, nor can one wear a kabul or shusarabim. Rashi, b'zman she'ein tefurah. Anyways, basically this head covering has to have these items attached. This head covering, is it a shaitel? Probably not. But this head covering is not typically removed when one is in the public domain, which now I need to pull back. I hope. Are you losing the screen right now?
No, we see it.
And now what do you see?
Same screen.
All right, so hold on. All right, so let me see if I can do this.
We're back to the ladies in jewelry.
Black
Yeah.
Not color. Oh.
Hold on. I just want to pull a few more. Now you see what I was getting at.
It looks like they're on J-Date.
If my wife would dress like that, I'd kill her.
Whoa.
Hey, whoa.
Alan, this is being recorded, Alan.
Yeah, we got to be careful.
Okay.
I think Alan is suggesting he would not. He would prefer his wife didn't have this
I don't know. I would sell the jewelry and buy real estate.
All I want to show you here, again, I'm not certain this is exactly what we're describing, the kabul, but look at that. It's a full head covering, or here, and you see all this jewelry that's attached to it. So again, I'm not suggesting this is exactly what the totefes looks like. I suspect it's more other kind of stuff. But you can imagine that this could either be loosely attached or stitched onto the head covering.
Look at the one below with the all up until the hair.
This one
here. Kurdish, the Kurdish one.
Anyways, yeah. So I think this might be, or this picture.
Yeah.
Again, the rabbi, I don't want to get in trouble. So the rabbi's showing pictures of. Oh,
no.
But I think this is important for us to visualize. And I have to get for you I told you about a Mishnah I found with pictures, and that would probably, I have to bring it to the show, but that would probably be another great way to show pictures to appreciate what's going on.
I don't see the record thing there.
It's being recorded. Once from the moment you heard the sound until the sound comes off, it's recorded. But don't worry, we can all.
It says
we can-
recording on my screen.
We can all attest that
Doesn't say on mine.
what you said was in
It's
jest.
because your wife heard what you said and pulled the plug.
All right. So anyways, these items cannot be worn out if they're not attached to the head, to the kabul, to the head dress. V'lo be'ir shel zahav, nor can you go out with an ear shel zahav. What is an ear shel zahav? It was another kind of big, mega head covering, as the Gemara will discuss. It had different kinds of pictures. Again, this is not something that you see many people wearing today. Rashi kiminushka mitzarin ba kimin ear. It was this kind of thing that had a cityscape on the headdress. So I guess if you were, say the Yerushalayim shel zahav. So I don't know if they had a. Anyways, okay. V'lo katla. You can't go out with a katla. We're going to see what a katla is. V'lo b'nizamim. Anyone know what nizamim are? A nezem. What's a nezem?
Yeah, nose.
A nose ring. Oh, where do we know nezem from? From the Bible, right? Eliezer brings Rivka nose rings. Then also those that study Pirkei Avot, we have the Pirkei Avot quotes from Tanakh. It says nezem afchazi, right? A nose ring on the. Anyways, v'lo betabas she'ein aleh chotam. Nor may women wear on Shabbos in the public domain a ring without a chotam, without a seal. Rashi, Surah Lachtam by Geras al Kodavar Sagar. We're talking about the kind of imprint that would be used to sign a letter or to put into a piece of wax or clay to create what we refer to in the modern day, the bula, right? That's what we find, those little clay stamps that were used to seal a letter, akin to what we discussed, right? That we said that David HaMelech was able to send a letter with Uriah to his general that had the instructions to kill him. How did Uriah not read the letter? Well, there was a seal on it, probably.
So, Rabbi, does that mean that with a seal you could wear it? It's a strange wording.
No, with a seal, it's biblically prohibited, I believe. We'll discuss that.
That's not what it says. The language.
No, it says v'lo betabat she'ein aleh chotam. The restriction includes a tabat that does not have a seal. We'll see. It's going to be discussed in a moment. V'lo b'machat she'eino nekuva, nor may one go out with a needle that does not have an eye in it, meaning it's not used for sewing. Now I'm going to do what we've done. Hold on. We're going to look for I should have done this earlier. We're going to look for our Rashi, our French Rashi compendium over here. Shabbos. Here we are. Nun Zayin. So Rashi. Koifa, a hairnet. Shivcha. So the Mishnah says that all the items need to be attached to what's on your hair. So I said it's the whole thing. But a hairnet, I think, is something we can appreciate. I mean, hairnets, I think we usually see more in the context of if you're working in some kind of a food industry or whatever, or some other kind of delicate in a laboratory environment, and you don't want the hair getting into stuff. Reb Beryl, have you ever seen a person use a hairnet in your profession?
What, the hairnets?
Yeah.
Yeah, they work. You have to in a restaurant. You have to wear it. In the pharmacy,
you have to.
If we have a pharmacy that has a lab,
if you're in a lab, right? Okay. Reb Allen. Okay, just wanted to make sure we're.
No, they never wore them in my time.
That was like Donnie Pearson's, Alan. Donnie Pearson's.
Oh, Shalom. Yeah, he was in compounding in Nabach. Yeah. Yezichro Baruch. All right, let's see. Ir shel zahav. Rashi said, Nushka umitzarim bakim in ir. So Rashi says this weird nushka is really a French word. He said that it might have been some kind of clasp that had a decoration with a. All right, that's not how I imagined it. All right, we'll see.
There's no commentary about the bat.
Not yet. We'll get. All No, this is Lazi Rashi. This is just what Rashi's words in French. You want to know why Rashi doesn't say anything about Tabachotam? Surah Lachtam B'Gerat Kol Davar Sagar. So the reason why we don't talk about with Echotam, hang on. Yeah, you know, again, we're going to see later on. We're going to see later on in the Mishnah that if it doesn't have a chotam, it's jewelry. You're allowed to wear it. You can't wear it into the public domain. If it had a chotam, it's biblically restricted, so it gets onto a different list. Not to indicate, as some of us thought, that you would be allowed to wear a tabat that has a chotam. By the way, just to throw in there, we're going to learn with the assumption that our discussion is about going into the public domain. There is actually a machloket if these would even be restricted in a chatzir, which is not quite a public domain. Just want to point it out to you. And here is where what I just told you about the tabat is relevant. If any of these items were worn out into the public domain, you do not need to bring a sin offering, and you have not desecrated Shabbos on the biblical level. Why? Rashi says, the chulu tachshiteninu, all of these items are adornments. And it's only the rabbis are the ones who said that you shouldn't do so. Unless you take them off for whatever reason and carry it. But it is not a biblical prohibition, and therefore you shouldn't do it under any circumstances, but there is not a biblical consequence, and that is the first Mishnah. Again, the Mishnah brought a series of different kinds of adornments and stuff, mostly on the head region, although we did talk about a ring and a needle, which are also relevant for our Mishnah, that you should not wear them out into the public domain. So you know what? I don't want to keep us in suspense. You're wondering, the Gemara is gonna talk a lot of very interesting Gemara, a lot of discussion, but I think we need to see the Shulchan Aruch right away and understand why all of us have wives. Not all of us have wives. All of us have experienced women. Maybe some of us have wives that wear jewelry out on Shabbos. And do we need to tell our wives it's Erev Shabbos today? And do we need to advise the women in our lives to remove the rings that they are wearing? So let's see what the Shulchan Aruch has to say. It's not as simple as you might imagine, but you don't need to make them stop wearing their rings on Shabbos. So kol she'asur chachamim latzis by their shus harabim, asur latzis by lechatzer she'einoi me'oreves. Typically, if the rabbis don't let you wear something into a public domain, you also should not be allowed to wear it into a courtyard that does not have an eruv, chutz mikabul, with the exception of a hairnet, upei anachris, and a sheitel. This is the Shulchan Aruch. So by the time of the Shulchan Aruch, they certainly did have wigs, hair that's woven or placed on your hair. There are those that say anything that the Chazal prohibit wearing out in the public. I feel this kashet bebayis also. There's an opinion that says that all the items of our Mishnah, you may not even wear it in your home. That's what I alluded to when I was telling you that there is a machlokes of the different interpretations of the Gemara. With the exception of the two full hair coverings, the hairnet and the sheitel. There's another opinion that says that you can wear any of these things into a courtyard, even if there is no eruv. So these are three different nuanced opinions about precisely where these restrictions and prohibitions extend to. This is what I wanted to show you. Nowadays, women go out with all jewelry. Why? A Mishnah, a Gemara, does the Mishnah change? The Yesha Amru, there are those that say the Medina Asurais. There is one interpretation that says really they shouldn't. One interpretation is really they shouldn't. But being that they will never listen anyway, it's better just to turn a blind eye, not to say anything. That's not going to be the final answer, so don't get too excited.
Surprised they don't bring in Shalom Bayis.
Hold on. Well, Shalom Bayis would never be a license to break, right? There are many things that if we would say that Shalom Bayis is an exception to waive all the laws of Torah, well, life would look very different.
Rabbi, it's interesting that they don't mention anything about earrings and the distinction between a pierced ear, where a woman often has an earring on all the time, and one with a clasp or something like that. But it would seem that...
well, you'll see soon there is a reference, not direct, to this idea, and it's also going to be a reference to what you mentioned earlier. V'yesha arod de medina asores. One answer. V'yesha lam dolein schus. Loymar shehei noigim kain. Al pisvor sachrem sheshikasafti shalei asru lotzeis betachshit and lechasser shnei whatever b'hashal leitzon shadam gomer have a kodesh shadam shalom karmelis. There's another explanation. Nowadays, you almost never have a real public domain with all the criteria, and so therefore, even when we walk onto Ocean Drive, maybe I'm not weighing in on the big question of what's, or when we go into other places, or time, being that it's really only a Carmelis, therefore it's allowed to be worn. It's like you're going into a chaser that doesn't have an Eruv, and there's a strong opinion that says you're allowed to go there on Shabbos wearing this stuff. The Rama adds another important answer. Dr. Hammer, look carefully. Another reason to permit the achshav shchichi tachshitim. Today, we live in a time of affluence like never before. Everybody's got jewelry. And women also wear jewelry in the weekday, whether it's the earrings that are literally almost permanently attached in the ear, or rings that, some rings are hard to remove and are almost never removed. But more importantly, we're very exposed to rings. And therefore, it's less likely that of all the times you're going to show off your jewelry and take it off is on Shabbos. In those days, it seems like they only had special Shabbos dress, kind of like I imagine some of the pictures that we looked at previously, which are ceremonial in nature, and they're only worn for special times. And it was a big chiddush. So your husband went off to India for a long-year business trip, and he survived, and he made it there, and he made it back, and it was profitable. Likely, if he's a good husband, he bought some jewelry in India and brought it home. But otherwise, what are the odds that you're gonna, if you're living in a shtetl or you're living in a, what are the odds that you're gonna have jewelry? And so therefore, I didn't want this question to sit because it's a big question. For this reason, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah indicate that it is acceptable that women should wear jewelry. The interesting thing is, if you read between the lines over here, it still sounds like we're pushing our luck. Really, we shouldn't, but we are, and there's some reasons why maybe it's okay. Ultimately, that is what we do. If
I refuse to buy jewelry, I could say to Rosalie, I don't want you to have this problem when Shabbos comes. Better not to buy.
But if she would call me, I would tell her that would be a perversion of what we studied.
Believe me, it wouldn't affect anything what I say.
I'm not going to take your side. Well, what you say won't affect. The question is if you get jewelry or not. All right, let's see. This is the Mishnah Berurah. Even to Times Square. Sorry, this is an earlier recap. So he says, interesting. Anyways, it says the Mishnah brings a bunch of limudei schus. Anyways, he says bottom line is like this. The whole license we've given is only when it is a tachshit. Obviously, we're not giving any license to wear other kinds of stuff that would be considered a burden. Let's just see the rest of the Kodesh Shulchan Aruch. Again, I answered this verbally. Miu tabas sheyesh alachos, a ring that has a signet, which is a business implement. Liisha v'shein alachos liish, or a non-stamped male ring. The Tanam b'chayv chatas, which the Mishnah says that would be a real problem. Then even today we shouldn't do it. Anything that's biblically prohibited, there's zero heter and wiggle room. Yesh Mishoimer, there's another opinion that says, nowadays, men wear wedding bands and other rings. The present day culture would make it acceptable to wear. And similarly, women who it might be might be prone to wear a ring that has some kind of imprint. That could also be considered an adornment. You should still be careful that the women should only wear authorized pins that are used to keep things together, but they should not wear just a needle just popped into their garment because they have nowhere to store it. That would be a problem. Little girls that have nose rings, and they sometimes place in a little piece of wood to keep it from closing up. So it says here, okay, we'll get to this later. I just wanted to show you this discussion about why we wear rings or jewelry in the modern day. It's a big question, it's a good question, but ultimately that is the deal. All right, back to the Gemara. Make sure we. All right. Oh, so let's just do a few lines of the Gemara and we'll call it a day. Tefillah, man decharshme. Where did anyone talk about mikvah? We're talking about Shabbos. We're talking about jewelry. What's mikvah got to do with this? Ma in tefillah eitzel hilchos Shabbos. Why are we mixing in an entirely different genre of Jewish law in the discussion of Shabbos? In the Mishnah. It's not unheard of for a Mishnah to reference another topic parenthetically, but every time it's brought in, there needs to be an explanation of why it was brought in. Amar Rav Nachman.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Because if you're going to be going to the mikveh, the question is, what are you going to do with your jewelry?
So that's the Gemara's answer.
Yeah.
Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Rabba bar Avua, Ma tam ka'amar. The Mishnah is actually giving a reason. Ma tam, what is the reason that lo teitze isha b'chutei tzemer v'lechutei pishlan? Why do we restrict what women are allowed to put into their hair, weaving these strands of wool or linen? Because of the other halachic, the other thing the rabbis taught us, b'chol, on weekdays, like titl behen ashetrab. Because on a weekday you have to untie them to go to mikvah. Kiva the b'chol like titl b'hem ashetrabim, being that on the weekdays you need to take it off. B'Shabbos lo teitze. On Shabbos you shouldn't even go out with them to begin with. Why? Because then maybe one Shabbos you'll have to go to mikvah, and then you'll untie it. So being that every time you go to mikvah you need to untie it, and being that occasionally one goes to the mikvah on Shabbos, therefore you should never wear it. Rashi v'sharilu. We mean to untie it. The rabbis did not say that you're not allowed to go to mikvah. They did say that when you go to mikvah, you should make sure you're not going to make a desecration of Shabbos, and the very easy way to mistakenly, inadvertently desecrate Shabbos would be to untie these items from your hair. Therefore, avoid carrying it to begin with. So the Marsha, I'm sorry, not the Marsha, the Rashba says, hold on, and the other Rishonim say this too. If that's the case, we should not allow women to wear anything that could be undone. She shouldn't be allowed to wear a belt that could be untied. Maybe she'll also take it off. And this is actually similar to what, it's basically what Tosfos says. The answer is no. The prohibition is only small adornments that we don't always wear and you're not always familiar with, you're not always aware of its presence, and you might take it off. Big items like a belt that maybe a person wears commonly and they feel it and they know it and it's the common part of the wardrobe, that's not restricted, and that's again exactly what we read in Tosfos.
Rabbi, how do we deal with again the usual problem of dual purpose let's say a woman has a kind of pin that holds her kerchief together, and it's windy out. Is she allowed to walk with that on Shabbos?
So let's see. I'll tell you why I'm not answering, because these are precisely the topics that we're slowly going to be reviewing in this chapter. So we're going to get a lot of guidelines about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and we are going to find out that it's not quite as simple as we might have imagined.
Dr. Hammer put us into this dual purpose thing.
Dual purpose, right?
Gets us into a mess everywhere.
No, but he had a different word for it.
Yeah. Functional.
He has a fancy word. He gets paid for his time. I
Functional.
know.
Right. Fixedness.
Fixedness, yeah. And so that's how mikvah falls into the laws of Shabbos. Boy minei Rav Kahana mirav. Rav Kahana asked Rav, Teichi chalilta mai. What is the halacha with hollow chains? Let's get a better word here, and we're going to probably stop before we get to the answer. Excuse me. What is the halacha of chains made of open link threads? I still don't know what that is, but a thick, loosely woven material or something to that effect. Amar lei, he says, Are kamart. So you're basically talking about woven stuff. Koshu arag legazer. Something is woven. That's not part of the prohibition. Something that's a weave work, it's woven, that is not a problem for the laws of Shabbos. Let's see, Rashi, Mahu likloya b'ha'in Sarah lotzet b'Shabbos. Can you have this on top of your hair or woven into your hair? Sheni yechel l'moitchan l'doichan al seyar v'chazaka. It's not really tightly affixed on your hair. So therefore, b'mayim nichnasim b'an, the water can flow through it. So now the question is, mi have a chatzitza l'teitzi b'Shabbos mishum zeh tfilas mitzvah oy lo have a chatzitza. So is this an issue for mikvah? So Rashi explains the Gemara that his question was, teiche chalil tamai, what is the halacha of these hollow, thick, woven stuff? He was actually asking a question about mikvah according to Rashi. And he said, oh, you're talking about weavewear, woven stuff. That's not an issue. Water can flow through it. And therefore, you're allowed to wear it on Shabbos. Because the whole issue was something that needs to be removed on Shabbos. You will remove and you might carry. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz, and this will be how we'll close out our session. With regards to strings made of woven hollow chains, what's the law? Can women go to the public domain with them on Shabbos or not? Well, it depends what the law is for mikvah. So Rav says you're talking about woven. There's no decree. Why? Water reaches the hair unobscured, so there's no need to loosen the hollow chains. There's no concern she'll carry it. And indeed, Rav Huna, son of Rabbi Yeshua, taught exactly that. So we'll stop over here.
Rabbi, before you go, I see the professor's not on. Have you spoken to him? How is he?
I will be speaking to him today, B'linet Be'ezer Hashem, but I understand he is still recovering. Shkoyach for asking, and I'll send him everyone's regards. And just to recap really fast, today's Gemara. We started a new chapter all about what humans can wear. And we started off talking about Bamaisha, about womankind of adornments. And we started with a list of things they cannot wear out. Most of them were on the head, although we also have a pin and a ring and other items. The Gemara has yet to define all of them. And Mirz Hashem, in the coming days, we'll see the Gemara's definition and the Gemara's discussion. We started off asking about the first few items that are worn on the head. And the Mishnah talks about tefillah, about mikvah, and we said, where does mikvah fall in? And the answer is because sometimes you go to mikvah. Therefore, anything that has to be removed is a concern on Shabbos, and therefore don't wear it to begin with. Interestingly enough, we make a gzeira for the entirety of Shabbos because of this not that frequent scenario of going to mikvah, which leads to another question, which we didn't answer today. If you remind me, maybe we'll try to discuss it on Sunday, which is what about a woman that doesn't need to go to the mikvah? Either she's unmarried or she's no longer at the stage in life where she's going to the mikvah. Can they wear these items? Lena, if you remind me, we'll discuss it briefly on Sunday. Until then, I want to thank you all. Wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos. And we'll pray for good health for Avigdor and Sarah and for all of the good folks. Emir Hashem, in 1 second, we'll end the share, and then we'll invite everyone to rejoin to study today's portion of Chumash. Wishing everyone a relaxing, peaceful, and blessed Shabbos.
Amen.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.